Hello, I'm Glenn Poole, CEO of the Australian Men's Health Forum. This is Men's Health Connected, Day 4, where we're focusing on nursing for men's health. This session looks at careers working in nursing with men, as well as nurses' wellbeing and leadership. We've got 3 speakers lined up: Glenn Taylor, CEO of Nursing and Midwifery Health Programme Victoria; Athol Han, the founder of the Forwards Wellbeing app; and specialist prostate cancer nurse, Craig Millard. So Craig is our first speaker, and Craig is a prostate cancer specialist nurse at Mildura-based public hospital. Grew up in Broken Hill and started nursing at the Royal Adelaide Hospital straight after school, way back in the 80s, way back in 1987. So doing some quick mental maths, I make that about 34 years of nursing experience. He's worked in emergency nursing, mental health, Aboriginal health, and chronic disease management. And he's been a prostate cancer specialist nurse in Mildura since 2014. So for those of you who saw our first session, you'll now be in no doubt that nurses can play a huge role in improving the lives and health of men and boys. And here, Craig is going to share his experience of working with men as a prostate cancer specialist nurse. Craig, thanks for being here. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. As Glenn said, my name's Craig Millard. I'm a prostate cancer specialist nurse for the PCFA. I live and work in Mildura, northwest Victoria, and I'd like to acknowledge the Barkindji people as the original custodians of the land from where I live and work. So I've got a presentation. It's about a 15-minute presentation about my career in nursing. And I started 34 years ago. So just a bit of a background. I grew up and went to school in Broken Hill, New South Wales. Family's still in Broken Hill. I consider myself a country boy. I head back to Broken Hill regularly for family shows. Broken Hill is 300 k's from Mildura, so it's pretty close. And I started nursing straight out of high school. I'd done hospital-based training back when we used to train nurses in the hospital. And it was at the Royal Adelaide Hospital. I was in group 876, and then I graduated in 1990. My grad year at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, I ended up working in emergency department, and then basically stayed there for 6 years after. The emergency department at the Royal Adelaide was divided into 2 sections. There was an emergency surgical suite, which dealt with the major trauma. And then there was an emergency department, which dealt with all the other medical emergencies and all the other minor trauma things. So we would share our time between both of those units. While I was there, I'd done a grad dip in emergency nursing at the University of Adelaide. It's where I met my wife, Shona, who was also a country girl, lived in a place called Manangatang, which is in Victoria. And that's just out of Swan Hill. So it's probably another hour and a half from Mildura, where we live now. We got married in 1997, and both being country people, we both wanted to live in the country and nurse in the country. So in 1998, we moved to Mildura, and Mildura offered us opportunities for our nursing, and it was a great lifestyle. We both would visit Mildura for sort of holidays as we were growing up. But it had a health system that gave us a few opportunities. So I think that in a rural and a country settings is pretty important, and it can be hard for country towns to attract nurses. So we moved to Mildura. I worked in the emergency department initially, and the first thing that struck me was the huge difference between emergency nursing in a major city hospital and emergency nursing in a rural country hospital. In a city hospital, the Royal Adelaide, we were supported by teams of nurses. We had emergency physicians, we had all the specialty surgeons that you could have. There was a big ICU department. It was a big teaching hospital as well, so everyone was really quite keen. And there was a helipad on the roof. We were pretty well prepared for just about anything, and everything did rock up there. In the country, it was completely different. I felt out of my depth because I didn't have the skills, the broad range of skills that the country nurses had. We had general surgeons that would come to the emergencies during their normal work days, and we had an orthopaedic surgeon in town. General physicians would come and help out, and GPs ran the emergency department. what really threw me was at the Royal Adelaide, all the children and babies would go to the Women's and Children's Hospital. So when I found myself in Mildura, we're looking after children and babies in emergency situations. It was just sort of a bridge too far for me, really. So after a couple of years, I left and moved across into mental health. It was something I always wanted to do. And I think 8 years in emergency nursing is probably enough. So in mental health, I worked in the hospital inpatient unit. I worked there for a couple of years. I've done a grad certificate in community mental health distance education, just to try and support what I do clinically with some education. And there are all those opportunities out there for nurses as far as distance education is concerned. And I think it's really essential for nurses to understand mental illness if they're going to work as a nurse. It doesn't matter what area we work in. You can take those skills with you, and an understanding of mental health is really, really helpful and really important. So it is hard work working in an acute inpatient unit, and you really develop this really high respect for the mental health patients, and you get patients with really stubborn, deep depressions, and the schizophrenic patients and patients with bipolar, and what they go through in an inpatient unit to work through to wellness is really, really, it's amazing how they do it. And then to get out and function in the community, it's a pretty special place to work sometimes, and hard work. So after a couple of years, we'd had 2 children, a 2 and a 5-year-old. My wife was working shift work, and I decided it was time to stop working shift work. So then moved across into community health. I started working in an Aboriginal health service in Danton, New South Wales, called Coomealla Health Aboriginal Co-op. And Danton's about 25 kilometres from Mildura. We had a visiting GP, so we ran a GP service. It was staffed by Aboriginal health workers. We ran men's and women's health programs. We had community officers, we had transport officers. The place was run by a community board, and we provided an outreach service to Balranald. It was completely different to anything I've ever done, and really worthwhile. Most of my work was chronic disease management, and I was work with the GPs and the Aboriginal health workers to try and help the community manage chronic diseases, mainly diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. I'd done a sexual health grad certificate through the College of Nursing, and I was encouraged to do this by the mainstream community health service, sexual health nurse. The mainstream health service out there is Far West Area Health Service. But by doing the sexual health grad certificate, it enabled me to do some very basic sexual health assessments. And really the main reason for that was to help manage sexually transmitted infections in the community. So I would talk with the men and do a basic sexual health assessment. And the men were quite comfortable talking to me. And of course the females would talk to the women in the community. When I was working at Coomealla, it's where I started to first get exposed to men's groups. And they'd basically involve a barbecue on the river. We'd have guest speakers. Coomealla is where the Darling River meets the Murray. And where that meets the Murray, there's this beautiful parklands there, and that's where we'd gather. And we'd have a men's health meeting, and we'd have guest speakers. I'd talk about chronic disease. We'd have a mental health person talk about mental illness, and we'd get various speakers in to help us out. And there'd be people from places like Vic Roads or Centrelink or the Community Employment Program to come along and talk. And the men in the community would come along, the health workers would let them know about it, and we'd have a barbecue. And generally they were good days. We also had men's weekends, and they were really for the ALOs, the Aboriginal liaison officers, and the health workers and the male nurses that worked in the community. We would go down to the river, spend the night fishing, sitting around talking, laughing, just having a good time. It was sort of a relaxing bonding time for the health workers. Didn't take any alcohol on those trips. It was really just it was sort of a work show. So it was around then that sort of men's health became comfortable for me, and I started to think that men's health does exist in its own entity. And I was able to establish some community networks. Now in my role as the prostate cancer nurse, I attend those meetings and talk about prostate cancer. I think talking to our Aboriginal communities about prostate cancer is important. not because I think they've got a major issue there, but I think the young men need to know about prostate cancer so that they need to have their priorities on more important things and then worry about things like prostate cancer later on in their life. The Mildura Aboriginal Health Service runs a Good Men's Health Week every year, NAIDOC week, and I go along to that and talk about prostate cancer as well. So after 3 years working in the community, I found myself back in the hospital, and I was working in the hospital admission risk program, which is the hospital chronic disease management program, mainly working with people with lung and heart disease. We would rotate through the cardiac and pulmonary rehab classes, and eventually I started to specialise in chronic kidney disease, and it may have been my work in the Aboriginal Health Service that sort of lent me towards there. But I'd work with the visiting nephrologist and the Royal Melbourne Hospital, provide the expertise in the Mildura area and the support. So eventually I started to support people on home dialysis, home peritoneal dialysis. I've done a grad certificate in chronic kidney disease and completed a Flinders self-management program. And I think the principles of self-management and chronic disease management do help me now in looking after patients with prostate cancer. There's a long life expectancy after men are diagnosed with prostate cancer, and it's essential that they start self-managing themselves. So in 2014, I started work as the prostate cancer specialist nurse. The PCFA put the program up. I was applied for it and was lucky enough to get the position. In the first 3 years, I consider it really as an apprenticeship. It was all about setting up a new program. I completed my mapping program, which was really quite good. I finished the Latrobe prostate cancer nursing course, and it was about developing rapport with all the stakeholders in the community, and providing a service and working on providing a service that was actually valued, that got referrals so that I could actually add something to the patient's care. They weren't going to refer to me just because I was the PCFA prostate cancer nurse. I had to go out there and develop a program that was going to help people in the community. I think one of the really good things about the PCFA is they stress the importance of each of us setting up our own programs, because each of our own communities and health services is unique. So in that first 3 years, I think we worked that out, and there's a lot to learn about cancer management and prostate cancer. And it's a tough 3 years, but I think you're well supported and it's well set up, and it's well worth doing. I mean, people just need to be encouraged to work through that 3 years developing their program. So, but most of what I do is supportive care. In cancer services, we have what's called a supportive care screening tool. The PCFA have a fantastic one there for men with prostate cancer. I love it, and a lot of my work is based on that screening tool. So we have a distress thermometer, so men are able to describe how much distress they've been in as far as their cancer is concerned, and that's out of 0 to 10. Then they have 5 domains of care. So there's practical factors, so their work and finance, whether there's issues there, family, any emotional problems, any issues as far as the treatment's concerned, and then of course if they have any physical problems. I think it's a great way to set up a care plan for men with prostate cancer. It gives them permission to talk about sensitive issues like their emotions, their erectile dysfunction, incontinence, any distress they're in, and their families. And it also gives us permission to talk to men about those sensitive issues. I actually hold it up to the men and say, look, this is a tool that men with prostate cancer fill out. Do you mind filling it out, or do you mind if I ask you the questions? So that they know they're getting the same care as every other man with prostate cancer that I work with. So my care plans basically involved around contacting men at times of distress. Now in cancer services, there's clearly identified episodes of increased distress for people when they're diagnosed with cancer and when they're having their treatment. So the main episodes of distress where I contact blokes is at diagnosis, clearly a very stressful time. Men have to make treatments about decisions, so they need to talk about that. They need information so they can make that decision. They need to be comfortable with it. So I contact them then. When men are having treatment, I like to contact them. I don't necessarily do any of the treatment, but I like to contact them and see how they're going with things. A lot of the treatment for men with prostate cancer in Mildura happens in Adelaide or Melbourne. So when they return to Mildura, I like to contact them just to reduce the variations of care of not having any in Mildura, and just to make sure that they know they're supported and know they can call me. If men have complications, it's very stressful, so I keep in touch with them then. And of course, managing side effects is an increased causes distress for people, but we generally can predict a lot of the side effects and prepare men for them so that when we do have to work them through it, it's less of a distress for them. When men finish their treatment and they're quite well, it's up to them. I like to say to them that I'm around and I'm not abandoning them. If they want to contact me, if anything else happens, if they get metastatic disease, something changes, they can call me. But otherwise, I discharge them and then they know they can call me back. When people get cancer, the whole families get cancer and they have lots of questions. So I think it's a very important part of our role to be available for the families. I encourage all my men to bring their wives in or their children in if they want to come in and have a chat, especially in those early contacts, so that they know that I'm there and they know that they can build up a rapport with me and I can build up a rapport with them. I think it's essential that I'm available for the family as well as the patient, and that I'm contactable for them as well. So what do I like about working with men? Men really want to talk to someone, and they want to talk about what is happening to them. I think in this role, in this position, we really give them permission to do that. And I think if we can make a safe place for them to talk, private place, and develop a rapport with them, they really look forward to coming in and having a chat with a prostate cancer nurse about what's happening. And they will talk about sensitive issues. They'll talk about things like erectile dysfunction, shrinking genitals, their emotions, their family. Given the opportunity, they will talk about that. And I think it's one of the best things about our job is we can give men the opportunity to talk about things that are worrying them. I like this job because the average age of men with prostate cancer is 68. And I think it's very, very grateful and appreciative group. And they're really thankful for the work that I do. And I think that helps as a nurse. And that's reflected with the PCFA. The PCFA was born from prostate cancer support groups, and we work for the PCFA now. So whenever we go to functions, whether it's an education session or conferences, the PCFA make us feel really appreciated, and they're really grateful for the work we do out there in the community. And it's a great organisation to work for. Also, working with men in this role, there's a sense of pride in being a man when you work with men and you see the way they handle what could be considered really quite emasculated changes in their bodies as they go through their treatment. So they have things like loss of libido, erectile dysfunction, shrinking genitals, emotional issues, weight gain, hot flushes. Men on hormone therapy get very emotional. And seeing the way that these guys work through that and still continue with their roles in their families and their friendships is really, really rewarding. And I should say that not all men get all those side effects. A lot of men will get some of those side effects at some stage during their treatment, but they certainly are significant effects for men to have and for us to help them work through. Okay, so just to finish up my current projects, after coronavirus and the shutdown, we're starting to get our oncology exercise groups up and running and our support group meetings. I really enjoy participating in the exercise groups and heading along to support group meetings. And it's because every other contact I have with men is when they're in distress or there's something happening with their treatment. When I see them in the exercise groups and the support group meetings, they're really quite well. The exercise groups, the men have to be quite well to do it. And we can sit down, we can talk about the football, talk about what happened on the weekend, what they're doing on their holidays. So there's another aspect to the job. And the same with support group meetings. Men attend support group meetings because they want to support other men. They want to help other men out. It's not a place of illness. And I think it balances out my role quite well, because most of the time we're working with doctors and medications and side effects, and then I attend the exercise groups and the support group meetings, and it does balance things out nicely. In Mildura, we're developing the Cancer Council Community Education Program. So we're basically planning on running community programs for newly diagnosed people with cancer, and then we'll be running survivorship programs as well. So there'll be 2 people running each of those sessions. It'll be myself and another female. And it's a good opportunity, I see, for my patients' wives to come in and talk to a female about the issues they're having with their husband, or the concerns they have with their husband who's just been diagnosed with cancer. Men's Health Week's coming up in June. We've got 3 men's sheds in the area, so I have a talk scheduled in each of those sheds. And this year I'm going to do the talks with a physio and a GP. And I'm looking forward to re-engage with the local Aboriginal health services after the coronavirus shutdown. So that's my 34 years of nursing. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not sure what you want to do now, Glenn, but just want to thank Chris McNamara and Glenn Poole for asking us along to talk.
You're very welcome, Craig, and great to get an insight into your own personal journey. Really interesting to hear that your journey into men's health as a thing through a not very traditional route, through the working with Aboriginal communities, where as we know, men's business and women's business is a thing. Could you say more about that kind of experience of seeing men as a group rather than as sort of like an individual patient?
In the Aboriginal community, it is a thing. There's men's business and women's business. I do talks in the hospital and out in the community at Rotary clubs and that sort of thing, to men and women, and we talk about everything. We talk about erectile dysfunction, treatments for erectile dysfunction, incontinence, all these quite sensitive issues to men and women, and that's fine. But in the Aboriginal community, there's men's business and women's business. The men really like it to be delivered to them only, with no women around, and I feel comfortable doing that. It's a good fit.
Yeah, and I really like what you had to say about the. It's about the idea that when a man gets cancer, the family gets cancer, and so that while you're focused... Carry on.
Yeah, absolutely, they do, and there's evidence to say the carers go through as much, if not more, than the patient with the cancer, and especially the children. My patients have grown-up children, but they all want to come in and they all want to know what's happening, and they should. And it's essential that they come in.
Yeah, so even though you're a men's health specialist, you're not just working with men in isolation, you're working with men as a community, from your work with Aboriginal men through to today working with older men in men's sheds. But I also got that really interesting model. I think from a public perspective, when we think about, prostate cancer, when we think about nurses, we think very much of the medical aspect, and maybe a little bit about the kind of relationship that people have with nurses, but we don't sort of stop and think about that 5-step model you gave in terms of, that full psychosocial model. I mean, that could apply to any issue really, right?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. All streams of cancer have supportive care screening tools. And it's great. It's a great assessment. It's great. It covers just about everything. Patients get sick of answering them, but they're aware of what's on them. So a lot of times, if something does come up, they look forward to answering the supportive care screening tools so they can get their message across that something's happening that's not right.
Yeah, I've got a point from the very first session just noted down, which was Dr. Garth Kendall, who said one of the values of nurses is that we can focus on people rather than diseases. And it's really interesting to see that even when you're taking a disease approach, such as prostate cancer, you're still able to approach it in a way where you're focusing on not just the whole person, but the whole of their life and their family and everything around them. Yeah,
that's right. And there's one section that's physical symptoms. One out of the 5 is about the physical issues. The rest is all about the psychosocial, emotional response to cancer. And I think, that's correct. That's how it should be. You're looking after a whole person, and you're looking after a family.
Yeah, well, that's great. You've given us a really great insight into the world of the prostate cancer nurse and the world of a nurse specialising in working with men. Am I right in thinking that most prostate cancer nurses are still women at the moment?
Yeah.
And some great women doing that work. Obviously, it's not a criticism, but you're still in the minority as a man working in that space.
Yeah, I think it's the same reflection across the whole profession. I think it's about 10%. And a lot of my patients, they say they don't care if it was a man or a woman.
Yeah.
And I did share my role with a female colleague, and a lot of my patients said it was nice that their wives were able to talk to a female. So there's certainly, you can argue if there's any advantage or disadvantage. I feel advantaged as a man looking after men with prostate cancer.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that women feel disadvantaged looking after men with prostate cancer. They shouldn't, because there's more than just one person with the cancer, if you like.
Yeah, and ultimately it's about the quality of the relationship you build with the man, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Craig, that's been a really interesting talk and an insight into your world. We're going to have to move on, but I'll just leave you with one comment in the chat box there, which is from Jackie Morrison. She says, "Thanks for sharing. Interesting, varied, and informative." So a little bit of instant feedback from the audience for you there. That was Craig Millard, and we're going to move on now to our second speaker, moving from the well-being of men into the well-being of nurses. So our second speaker joining us today is Athol Han. Athol's a critical care and emergency nurse and founder of Forwards, which is an app designed to assist healthcare workers to control the fundamentals of shift work and offload with the demands of working in healthcare. And that's Forwards, F-W-A-R-D-S. I'll pop it in the chat box so you can see how it's spelled. With over 10 years experience working in healthcare and extensive knowledge and certifications in leadership, mentorship, and communication, Athol has developed an intricate understanding of the problems that shift workers experience within the healthcare system. And so here is Athol now. Hey, Athol, how are you?
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, very welcome. Over to you to work out the sharing of your screen and all the rest of the things you need to do to tell us a little bit more about Forwards.
Thanks, mate. No, appreciate it. I'm just going to share now. I'll go back up to the start. Is that coming up all right for you there, Glenn?
Beautiful, Athol. Over to you.
Beautiful. Thanks. Well, thanks for having me today, and it's fantastic to see programs and sessions like this coming out. And I remember when I was going through university, I run a men's health program back in Victoria, and because I was really passionate about men's health in a local town and the footy club, and we had a series of events. And so I've been quite passionate about men's health for a while. So it's great to be included and invited and being a part of the sessions. So I want to, I suppose it's a bit of a story today, but I want to introduce why I ended up building an app to help prevent burnout in nursing. And it's probably ingrained on who I am as a nurse and who I am as a person. And yeah, I'd love to share with you a little bit of my journey. So going into why I become a nurse. I think it's an interesting concept we don't always pay attention to or really look at. You know, some of us get into it for all sorts of different reasons. And for me, why I got into it is that I wanted to travel. I wanted to experience new cultures and experience new things. I wanted to step away from the farm. I grew up on a dairy farm. And so I wanted to continually learn, you know, and develop myself in a different role. And funny enough, my grandmother in the picture there suggested nursing. I was meant to do exercise science, and it just wasn't something right, and I just couldn't pinpoint it. But she suggested that I give nursing a go because, you know, I liked helping people. I liked studying, and, you know, I had a real fascination with the human body, and, you know, up there as well. A big sporting background when I was coming up through as well as a kid. And so, her leadership and her advice there sort of just nudged me in the right corner, and I just jumped in full on. I didn't really, I just felt right. There wasn't a lot of thought into it, but since then it's become really, really essential. And I've loved the journey. So up there too is during my little stint of burnout that you'll hear about shortly, is I've become a football trainer, and I was using my nursing skills as a football trainer, and then there's obviously the team dynamic, and so there's a lot of aspects around nursing that I really enjoy. So my early career, I studied in Victoria. I studied in Bendigo at La Trobe University, and really enjoyed it. Actually did some leadership programs, and was involved in men's health down there as well. And then I moved across to Perth, started off my career at Royal Perth, did a 2-year graduate program, rotating through medical oncology, neurosurge, and then ended up in intensive care. A very challenging, interesting part of my life. I look back on it and really appreciate it and enjoy it and love it. But on the same hand, this is where my period of burnout come from as well. And I'll touch on a little bit of that today. And it's really fueled and brought me through that part of the journey, but it's fueled the development of the app as well. And I didn't realize when I was building the app that's what it was specifically addressing, but I was just trying to solve some problems that I was facing and dealing with whilst working shift work as a nurse. One thing to point out that before we jump into burnout and the app is that nursing is so much more than what we think of it. And as I touched on earlier, what drove me to get into nursing really come throughout my early career and just me as a person. I love doing different things. I love to have variety, and I love being able to move and think differently and be really creative. I like to be kept in touch with home and farming, like building things. I certainly like spending a bit of time on the water, paddling. And then the bottom right corner, that's when I was out at Richmond in Queensland as an agency nurse, working in their clinic, and was able to spend some time with the local ambulance driver who's there on the right. He drove the ambulance, but he was also one of the trainers of horses in the local area. So I think it's good to point out that it's a diverse career that you can have, and being a nurse doesn't mean that you're labelled as a nurse forever. I think it's just one part of your life that you can incorporate in many ways. So taking those thoughts a bit further in how I ended up with burnout was I was really feeling lost. I hadn't gone through that journey. I hadn't really pictured and understood what some of the aspects were that I got into nursing, what really drove me to be a nurse, and who I was as a person. Was I going to be a nurse doing shift work my whole life, and what did that mean to me? And what were some of those emotions and thoughts that I was going through, especially in intensive care? There was some traumatic times, and really being able to deal with some of those thoughts in my head was really tough. I really struggled at times to think and feel if I was making a difference. I felt really uncertain. I'd lost the passion for what I did as well. I really enjoyed certain aspects of what I was doing in critical care, but I just really didn't understand why I wasn't, really feeling it, considering this is what I'd wanted to do. So I lost that joy in nursing, and it really impacted me for someone who was deeply passionate. Is really loved nursing. Really developing through, and I struggling to understand why I'd lost my really drive for nursing. What I was finding that was contributing to my experience of burnout at the time was shift work, along with this concept of I didn't really understand why, you know, some of the aspects of what it meant to be a nurse and what I was doing working in intensive care and what was my drive and purpose to be there. But shift work really added on another layer. So I already had these thoughts running in my head that, you know, I wasn't good enough, or, you know, are we making a difference? You know, the patients we look after, are they getting better? You know, what does this all mean? And then you add in shift work where you're changing times, irregular shifts. Sometimes your pay was wrong. And then, you know, your disconnection from your team, your colleagues, you might see a friend every 2 weeks maybe, because you're on different shifts. And then you've got this disconnection with your family and your friends. So your support networks outside of work you can feel really disconnected. You know, sometimes you miss personal gatherings, family gatherings. Sometimes it's hard to really get involved in a team sport. And that was what I was finding. I was really struggling to maintain supportive networks outside. And since, you know, I had moved away from home, but, you know, finding those close-knit groups in nursing and maintaining those relationships is really interesting. And I've been doing a bit of work. We've released a course on burnout just recently, and been doing, you know, a little bit extra work in the course, and, you know, reviewing the Harvard study, which is, you know, which was started in I think 1944, and they've been following a group of men for since then. And the one thing that the biggest thing that they found from this study is that the relationships we have are so critically important to our long-term well-being and health, and they help us live longer. And I certainly feel that when I was feeling really disconnected from my family and friends, is that, you know, it makes you feel terrible when your stress levels go up, your ability to cope, your emotional and mental thoughts are you really struggle with. So I really relate with that Harvard study that's proven that, you know, the one thing that really matters is the relationships we hold, and shift work can really test that. I also discovered that I wasn't alone after a bit of a journey. And the point with burnout is that I didn't actually understand that I was going through burnout until probably 2 or 3 years after, or at least a couple of years when I was back home on the farm. So when I actually left intensive care in Perth and moved back to the dairy farm, and I was going to be a farmer. And a couple of mates, you know, remind me of this, is that I was hell bent on it. I didn't want to have anything to do with nursing anymore. I was just absolutely burnt. I just couldn't see the purpose and drive to continually butcher myself and sacrifice my own well-being for the job. And so I went back to the dairy farming, and, you know, it went really well. I really enjoyed it for certain aspects. And, you know, there was a turn of events on a footy field, actually, as you pictured on the first slide or second slide, is that I was involved in an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. And, you know, fortunately, we had a really good outcome, and we were able to revive one of the umpires. And so that sort of got my cogs going again to, you know, consider coming back into nursing. But I share this with a heap of nurses every year. So we have a turnover in nursing that equals 15% annually. And that equates to 54,000 nurses a year. And there's an extra zero in there. It's not 540, it's 54,000 nurses a year. And burnout isn't a complete reason for all that turnover, but it is having a major impact and factor. And we're seeing that more and more. And, you know, if it's not burnout, it's maybe that loss in connection with family, or, you know, some of the stresses with shift work, you know, some of these pressures that we do face on the front line that we need to change out of it for our own mental health and well-being. So it really is impacting us. So after some soul searching and, you know, a lot of self-discovery, I started to push on this, and I'm going, there must be a better way. And I can't be feeling like this the whole time. And, you know, if others are feeling like that, I really want to help my team, help my colleagues to live better and feel like they can continue in nursing without going through burnout like I did. So this is where Fords come from. So we really built Fords around this connection piece. So we wanted to enhance the lives of individuals around those fundamentals of communication, connection, mindfulness as well, helping people to debrief after a shift through a chat feature on the app, and then a section there to help people understand their pay, and we provide them a pay estimate. So really the app was built around a lot of the fundamentals that I was finding difficult with shift work. And then there's this element of how can we build high resilient teams in this as well. Now, this connection is a real issue within nursing and within teams. And we, to get change to happen, we can't just focus on the individual, but we need to focus on some of those team dynamics around an individual, especially around burnout and turnover. So this is where the app has come from. As I was mentioning, this connecting teams element is where I probably landed. I think that's the biggest benefit we could really provide early, is that we can connect the teams, we can deliver good information, connect everyone up from management to the night shift nurse, and start to assess and help each other manage and monitor shift work, but just even working clinically, sharing information and education. So there's a big element here around that connection and community piece. There's a space to reflect and debrief as well. Within the app, you can create an environment where you can selectively debrief for a specific team, or if there's been a particular incident that's occurred on shift, you can group each other. You can group into a small team and discuss what's happened, obviously keeping confidential. Pay estimate, as I was mentioned, because I'm not sure about the audience, but there's been plenty of times throughout my career where my pay's been wrong. And although, you're able to sort it, sometimes I have had, how much money have I missed? And it's maybe not something at your forefront or at your mind every day, but it's just a constant stressor, and it can be a stressor that you're checking, you received your pay, am I paid right? And it's just the level of security and certainty that you can have over your financials. We've also got an element of scheduling tasks. So as you can see here, this is only a brief overview of the app, but what we've tried to do is create an environment and a feature set that's really supportive of shift work and supportive of an individual and teams to really manage the demands of working on the front lines. So my big wish and my big dreams for nursing is for us to collaborate and grow and connect for this innovation element. I think nurses are born with lots of creative thoughts, and we do things in innovative ways, and we provide services, and we provide options that are really unique and or really address certain challenges that we have, that we personally face on the floor. So I think this innovation in nursing, I think in Australia we could really push this hard, and I'd love to see this rolled out nationally in curriculum. It'd be fantastic if this went into university throughout Australia, where we could really bring in innovation within nursing. In the US, they're really adopting this. The innovation is, you can do postgraduates, they incorporate it into the university degree. They're really leaning into this because they realize how important it is to be innovating from the floor, because nurses are experiencing problems every day. If they've got a problem, they haven't been able to fix it, or they'll fix it themselves, or they'll raise the flag, or they'll talk to their mates, and then they'll collaborate really well. So we should lean into that experience and those skills and help each other to really push forward. One other thing too is it's a big career development. I'd love to see other nurses stepping up into this innovation space and entrepreneurship, and join me in building technology or solutions that are really trying to solve some of the big challenges that we face within healthcare. I think there's a big opportunity, and especially for men as well. I think we overemphasize the word caring in nursing, and it's okay to care, whereas it's okay to build stuff. It's okay, we don't have a hammer, we're not a builder, but we can build products, we can be innovative, we can be creative, we can have new skills and new sets. And I was at the mechanics the other day, and you just see those correlations, and nursing and mechanics, they're different deliveries, but the mechanic's got to deliver a really good service to a car, and they've got to think creatively sometimes. They've got to think outside the box. They've got to look for solutions. They've got to look for, what's happening in that car. And in nursing, we share some of those same attributes and skills, is that we look for solutions. Yes, our commodity is care and, looking after people really well. That's what we're driven to do, but we use some of those problem solving elements that are very similar in other industries that men are in. And I think, to even lift up the more men in this space, I think innovation is one element we could lean into. So my advice and thoughts on moving forwards with purpose and avoiding burnout and getting through, without experiencing the nasty effects of it is career development in nursing doesn't have to be linear. You can take breaks, you can look for something else, you can have more variety, you can change things. And it was great to listen to the last presentation from Craig. He's done so many things. The variety in his career is absolutely exceptional. He's been able to stay healthy within his career for such a long period of time because he's done little bits and things, and now he's just, presented and looked like that he's, variety was a big part of his career. Finding a good mentor or two is really important. I've had some exceptional mentors over my career that have really supported me throughout nursing, but life as well. Develop the fundamentals first, and I think this is really important. That if you get through university into nursing, is that focus on that for a good 2 or 3 years. Really get those fundamentals set in stone. Once you've got those skills, once you've developed a good rounding of critical care skills, or even the skill set that you want with nursing, then you can start to think about what's next and what other elements I can go to, what other careers, or even use nursing as a launching pad. Nursing is a fantastic launching pad for lots of different things in our life, and I think we just need to focus on those fundamentals early and really solidify them. Keep true to your drivers and then let the wind take you. So I put this in here because I think it's important to understand why you get into nursing. What really drives you. Do you want to do different things? Do you want to make an impact? Do you want to grow and develop personally, but also professionally? And I think nursing provides just a wonderful career to really launch into whatever you want to be and what you want to do. And so I think it's really interesting that way. Last point, stay humble, hungry and smart. And, this was taken from a team communication book, but I think these elements are really pivotal if we want to grow and develop and, work well in teams and collaborate and grow and promote that innovative spirit. Also, top tips, be informed, Burnout No More is the course we've just released. There's also the Happy Nurse podcast, connect with a friend or a GP, take some me time, spend some time giving back, do the things that you like, and be proactive and download the Forwards app.
Right. Thanks, Athol. There's his email contacts. And can you also make sure you post a link to your website in the chat box so people can go and find out more, or whatever links you need to share in the chat box?
Cool. No
Right.
worries.
Awesome talk. I really love the idea that, nurse is a caring profession, but also it can be about building stuff. I love that. And building self-care. It's a fantastic example of let's say a traditionally sort of male approach to caring, but clearly it's working for male nurses and female nurses. So great work, Athol.
Thanks, Glenn.
So haven't got time for live questions, but do have a chat in the chat box with people and stick around for our final talk, please, if you have time. So finally, we hand to Glenn Taylor, who's CEO of Nursing and Midwifery Health Programme Victoria. He's a registered nurse and the CEO of that organisation. He's worked in the profession for over 30 years, mostly in the areas of mental health and alcohol and drug use. Glenn has a long interest in the health of those in the profession, and he feels privileged to be in the position to directly support, assist, and influence his colleagues in Victoria's nursing and midwifery community. Here to tell us more about NMHPV is Glenn Taylor. Thanks for being here, Glenn. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Glenn, and good morning, still morning. Good morning, everyone, and really appreciate the opportunity to join you today, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about what we see and what our experiences have been over the last 12 to 18 months. Today, I'll just run through a bit of the background about the program, because I think the background will help with sort of identifying some of the principles that we work around, but also to reinforce what is really important in our profession to ensure.
Glenn, and just invite
Yes.
you to click slideshow at the top if you can, then, because we've got your notes there as well. If you can click slideshow at the top, that might the TV screen at the top.
Sure.
Yeah, to the right. So there's just like a little TV screen with an arrow to your right in the top bar.
Top bar.
Underneath design.
Design.
You've got file, home, insert, design. Underneath design. You can see your mouse is hovering on the slide. But if you move your mouse,
Wrong place.
Sorry.
Wrong place.
Yeah. If you try clicking on the slide, up, there's a little there's an icon of a TV screen with an arrow in it.
That's it.
That's better.
How's that?
We're still seeing your notes. Display settings.
No. Okay.
Try display settings, which is next to show taskbar. At the top. So I'm just getting. So I don't want to take up too much of your time.
No.
No, it's okay. Run it like that. It's fine. It just would have been.
No, that's okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to stop sharing screen. It's a distraction anyway. So is that okay, Glenn?
Totally fine. Totally
Great.
fine. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I thought I'd just give you an insight into our organisation, which can help sort of promote the fundamentals of why this organisation exists and how we can support one another. The organisation is the only one of its kind in the country. It started in 2006, and it was on the back of nurses and midwives experiencing extreme fear and anxiety around experiencing what we call sensitive health issues. Our definition of sensitive health issues is mental health concerns, so the high prevalence mental health concerns, anxiety, depression, and the like. But predominantly at the time, it was around alcohol and drug concerns, and nurses who were experiencing these types of crippling presentations said that when confronted about them, said that they didn't trust that their information would be safe, that they would remain confidential, and that they would and able to keep their jobs. So rather than reaching out to their employer or to the regulator or to even their own local doctor, they held it in. And what they were finding was that they were unable to manage that by themselves, and they subsequently there was some sort of an adverse incident. It might be driving under the influence, or it might have been an medication error, or it may have been even diverting medications from their patients. So when a small group of these impaired nurses were consulted on what would be beneficial to them, they said if there was something that was facilitated and run by us, so a peer-based support program that was confidential, free and independent from their employers or the regulator and the like, that would probably be a successful model. So what do we are, 15 years forward, that's proved to have been quite successful. So our organisation does just that. We're funded by the Victorian State Government. We were set up by nurses, we're run by nurses, led by nurses, and the services are provided by nurses and a couple of midwives. And our target audience is any nurse or midwife in Victoria or any student who is based in Victoria. It's free service to use. It is the difference that we talk about is that it's not so. What we commonly hear is, I see like the EAP. Well, we're not like the EAP because we are an independent service and we're run by nurses and that's provided by nurses. So we understand the territory, the landscape, the jargon. We understand what it's like to be a student, a graduate, a manager, a leader within our organisations. So we can sort of fast forward through that stuff really quickly, and it gives us a real sort of proximity to the people that we're supporting. As I said, we are free also. We see nurses and midwives who have any sort of issues. So typically it's work-related, but it doesn't have to be work-related. And anything that's having any impact whatsoever on the individual's health and well-being. And we obviously encourage people to contact us sooner rather than later. We do find that that when we engage with somebody, that rapport building is really important, like anywhere. And typically that can take, a couple of sessions. But what we've found is that once that trust is developed, then there's a sense of, there is that sense of camaraderie and you understand what I'm doing. I'm really sorry about the noise here at the moment. And then we assist the individual to either stay at work if they're still working and to practice safely, to get back to work if they're on a period of leave, whether it be sick leave or some sort of enforced leave, or even to help them exit the profession. Sometimes people just are better suited not to be working, and they've just, as Athel was saying, they've made a determination that this isn't for them. So we'll help them exit it. And we also really work really closely with employers and people and culture, HR, to support those people to overcome these matters. And that has a really beneficial and successful way of working, because we can assist them with their permission, assist them to do it in a very discreet way with their management. So it might be around rostering, it might be about how they come back into the workplace, it might be about working flexibly in the workplace. And that's been pretty helpful, and the feedback's been really positive about that. Not surprisingly, the year 2020 has been quite a challenge for all nurses and midwives. And what we're hearing on the ground, predominantly amongst everything else you can imagine, is just complete exhaustion. And most of them we're talking about are requiring unplanned leave. A lot of the nurses we're seeing at the moment have just they're just up to here with it, and they feel like they're drowning. And as a statewide service, we've been supporting them with everything from droughts, floods, fires, cyber attacks. A couple of regions were down for weeks and weeks with cyber attacks, and then along came COVID. So it's been an incredibly challenging time. What we found is that the things that you would typically understand, so around vicarious trauma, workplace relationship breakdown, violence towards the individual, abuse, aggression, these are sort of the typical things. Being on the end of some sort of accusation that's sort of rocked their world. And as you would appreciate, the nurses that we see who have those experiences really do find it challenging to maintain their confidence and retain their confidence to be able to work and to be in that workplace. And this is particularly relevant to people and to those of us who are in the room from non-metropolitan areas, where we find that there aren't services on every corner, there aren't health services on every corner. So sometimes people have to find ways to stay within their place of employment, even though it's not their ideal, because they have financial responsibilities and the like. We have been fortunate to find being granted additional funds this year to be able to extend our service to our colleagues in right across Victoria. And this sort of forum through Teams and Zoom has been really, really beneficial and broken down a lot of barriers, particularly around around travel. So we do get out to the closer regions such as Traralgon, Bendigo, Ballarat and Geelong to try and help those colleagues who are further out or in those areas to be able to seek that face-to-face support. But the feedback we've received is that they're quite comfortable in working like this, and they find that if it's working for them, then we're really happy to work with them in that way. As you probably expected, I think most of our participants that we see are female, but approximately 14% to 15% of our participants at the moment are male, and I think that's about 11% of the profession, registered profession are about 11%, I think. So it's a slightly overrepresented. But one of the observations that we make is that the men amongst us that come and seek our support typically, not surprisingly, find it incredibly difficult to show that vulnerability and ask for help. Like most of our participants, if not all. But anecdotally, they tend to really need to hit a very big crisis point before they reach out for our help. And that might come in the form of some type of legal matter. So it might be something related to drink driving, for example, or it may be an industrial matter that has come to light where they've been accused of something in relation to bullying or inappropriate behaviour, these sort of things. And it's almost as though, whilst we're a voluntary service, they are in some ways feel compelled to come and see us. And we welcome that. We welcome anybody who comes to us. But in those situations, it can be quite a confronting situation for them to be able to sit down and to share with us what they're feeling. And then it can take a while for us to be able to work with them to build up that rapport, that therapeutic rapport, because they maintain or retain a crisis perspective for quite some time. And one of the benefits of us working here is not only are we experienced in what we do in this capacity around counselling and support, but we've also been in situations in their shoes, many of us, and it is quite confronting. So we can share our own experiences in relativity, but we can also very carefully share past experiences of some of our previous participants who've come through the organisation, maintaining their confidentiality, of course, where we can demonstrate to them, well, this is we've dealt in similar situations to what you're describing, and it might be a surprise to you, but you can get through it. They got through it. The way they got through it was A, B, and C. And being in this area, in this role in this organisation, or doing this work in this organisation, does actually put us in a very privileged position of a lot of knowledge around how systems work, how AHRP works, how unions work, how employers are probably more so now than they were in 2008 when I started, slightly more empathic and sympathetic and understanding that there is a person behind that role and that they do have needs and sensitivities and problems like the rest of us, and that there's a way through this. We can work through this with potentially with a bit of a stick and a carrot, not just a stick. And AHRP does take and the board does take quite a sympathetic view to most of the cases that we work with. So being able to provide them with that sort of inside knowledge can be quite helpful and reassuring. And we say to everybody that we will guarantee that we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to help you, even though in almost all instances we do, but we will guarantee that we won't do any harm. And engaging in our service is not going to end up in find you in a worse state. And that's usually always the case. And those participants do take heart in that. So working with men in this field, I do find that that they do respond. They respond to all sorts of support, and not all of our clinicians will gel with everybody, but we do find that the men that we're working with are becoming more and more open to this type of approach, and that vulnerability that they're experiencing, or that's really required, is something that is a good investment for their health and well-being. So we do, we do encourage them to open up as much as possible. We do encourage them to look at the sort of things that are behind this. So what's been happening, the sort of things that Athol was talking about. So we don't just sort of end up in these places by accident sometimes. And in a lot of cases, the thing that might have sort of forced the issue for them or pushed them towards engaging with a service such as ours is the straw that broke the camel's back. And they can't quite understand why something so minor has left them feeling overwhelmed, in paralysis with anxiety or depression, or unable to get out of bed. And it's not until they come and talk to someone like us and we ask those really kind of dumb questions, those probing questions, those sort of simple questions, that they start to recognise that what's been happening over the last week or month is really not what is behind all of this, but it's what's been happening over the previous years and in some cases decades. And we can sort of help shine the light back on them. We don't propose to solve problems, and we certainly don't take control of people's lives. What we aim to do is to be a place where they can share, they can ask questions, they can get reflection, feedback, strategies, ideas, and they can drive their own bus. So we talk about being a passenger on their bus. So we help them sort of get into the driver's seat, drive their own bus, but knowing that we're in the back seat there along the way with them. And if there's anybody else that is better qualified to support them with specific needs, and that might be around, violence, managing their violence, or managing a sophisticated or intricate alcohol and drug concern, or a childhood, a long-standing childhood issue, then we will refer them on or provide them with information about referrals to specialist services who are better placed than us. But all the while, we'll case manage them along the way, and we'll be here to help them when they're ready to come back, or to re-engage with us if that's what they would like to do. So it's a very broad brush approach. We describe ourselves as being quite generalist, and we try and, the whole idea around reducing the cost and the accessibility and the obstacles was trying to make it as broadly and as broadly attractive to all of our nursing colleagues as possible. The thing that one of the pillars that we work on is that if we have a healthy nurse, then we can potentially have healthy environments that they work in. So that's their colleagues, that's the departments they work in, and through the ripple through the organisations ideally. But also too, and probably more importantly in some respects, we have healthy people in healthy homes and relationships and in communities, because as has been alluded to today, we are a nurse, but it doesn't define us. It shouldn't define who we are. And because a lot of the nurses we see, they wake up after decades of, not even decades, just years of working, and they realise that they have just given so much to the profession that they have neglected what's been important to them. So things around their own physical, emotional, mental, spiritual health, they've lost connection with people. And for some of them, they feel as though it's too late, even though it's not. So we really sort of try to get them to identify what are their priorities in their life, because we have different components, and if we can be our best component when we're in the workplace, then that's ideal. Be the best person we can be in our relationships, then that's ideal. And then hopefully we'll be better at both of those things if we can provide the attention that's required. So that's our organisation. That's what we've been seeing over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and I hope that's been helpful.
Glenn, that was fantastic. You've covered such a huge amount of distance in a very short time, but given us a really good insight into the range of work you do, and a great kind of view from the front line of how you see the nurses you're working with, and particularly male nurses. I mean, we're interested in all nurses, because a healthy nurse, male or female, helps with healthy men, obviously, but also great to get that insight into how men in nursing are engaging with your services, and get that sort of gendered feel of how they show up and how the culture is changing. So it's been really valuable. If there are any questions, please pop them in. We're going to be closing the room very shortly because we're on a tight schedule today, but just if you've got any questions or comments, some nice feedback there from Athol, really great points from Glenn here. What a fantastic service. And if you want to pop your details of the organisation into the chat box, so people have got a place to find out more. I'll just have a quick chat with our producers in the main room about closing these rooms. And then, a question from me. We're going to hit the timer button soon, and we'll be counted out. But you're a Victoria-based organisation. Are there similar services around the country? Do you offer support nationally? How does it work for the rest of the country, Glenn?
Yeah, one of your speakers this afternoon, Mark Aitken, he works for us, but his role is around promoting the nurse and midwife health, which is a national telephone support service for any nurse, midwife or student around the country. So Mark will speak more about that later this afternoon. And they're very similar to us in principle, run by the same sorts of people, confidential free, and a really extensive website as well.
Excellent. So we'll find out more about that in our final session this afternoon at 3 p.m. So I think that's it for us for this session. It's been a really fascinating journey. We heard at the beginning of the session from Craig Millard, prostate cancer specialist nurse, about his journey over 30 plus years working in men's health. For those who haven't been in the system in work for 30 years, Athol Han provided us with the idea of a wellbeing app, which for some of us over 50 plus is a bit hard to get our heads around. But I think it's something that more and more is definitely going to be used as a useful tool for managing wellbeing. It looked like a fantastic resource. Great to hear Athol sharing about that, and how wonderful to have a male nurse building that resource for the whole nursing profession. And we heard just then from Glenn Taylor, CEO of the Nurses and Midwifery Health Programme in Victoria. And remember, there is a service available nationally, and his colleague will be sharing about that in our 3 p.m. session. The breakout rooms are closing in 74 seconds, so thanks very much for your time. We'll see you back in the main room.